Hi everyone, Stepan here. In today's video I'm going to go over the quiet variation of the Slav defense, which is one of the simplest and easiest Slav variations to learn, and I would say if you're starting out with the Slav defense with white pieces, this could be an easy opening to learn. But one thing should be mentioned, it does avoid a lot of mainline theory and a lot of volatile double-edged tactical variations which black could go for, which white could go for. So it's not the best choice if you are trying to learn the Slav or the Semi-Slav in general. Okay, so we reached this position from the opening move d4, so the queen's pawn opening, d5, black is fighting for the control of the center, not allowing an easy e4 or c4 by white, c4, the queen's gambit, and black declines it with the Slav defense, c6. So now if white chooses to take, black is going to recapture, we have the exchange Slav. If white goes for one of the main moves, knight f3, black responds symmetrically with knight f6, and now by far the most common move is knight c3, after which black would choose e6, a6, taking on c4, a lot of different variations. And here, if white doesn't play the move knight c3, there are basically only two moves which are considered to be good, or theoretically good and playable at the highest level. That's queen c2, which is a very rare sideline, and the other move is the quiet Slav with e3. Now the move e3 is called the quiet variation for a reason. The first downside of the move e3 that you can see is that this bishop is stuck on c1, and it's going to be hard to develop the bishop. Therefore, white is going to be aiming to play the move e4 as soon as possible, and in most variations, as you are going to see, white is going to try to open the position up with e4, or he's going to try to play b3, bishop b2. The second thing, which is quite thematic about the move e3, instead of the move knight c3, is that the move e3 automatically defends the c4 pawn. So many of the variations which we've seen in the Semi-Slav series and in the Slav series, where black takes, d takes c4 and tries to hold on to the pawn, are simply impossible here. So from a human perspective, the move e3 is quite simple to play. You are defending your undefended pawn, and you are preparing to develop your bishop. The downside is, as I said, the c1 bishop, but white can live with that. Okay, black has several different options against this move. We are going to be looking at all of them. So the main move is the so-called shallop defense, or bishop f5, which is a move that makes perfect sense. Furthermore, we are going to be looking at e6, bishop g4, a6, and g6. Now, all of these moves have slightly different ideas, but one thing that should be mentioned is that most of these moves lead to semi-Slav positions as opposed to Slav positions. What do I mean by that? I'm just going to illustrate that with the move e6. As soon as black plays the move e6, he has now shut down this semi-Slav pawn triangle, and he is unable to develop his c8 bishop. So in one of the main lines of this variation, white is going to play the move knight c3, transposing to the main line semi-Slav, and this, of course, we are not going to be talking about. I've already talked about this. In this position, black is going to play the move knight b to d7, and white is going to continue with bishop d3, and we have the main line Meran. So after e3, black has several options, but most of them are going to be resembling the Semi-Slav instead of the Slav. Okay, the main move, which I want to focus on, and which is, in my opinion, the best move, is bishop f5. Now, why is bishop f5 such a good move? Well, this move simply opens the bishop up, develops it, and puts it outside of the pawn chain before playing the move e6. One thing you may be wondering is the diagonal or the b7 square or this diagonal weak? Well, it's really not. If white plays the move queen to b3, black doesn't have any real issues. Queen b6 can be played without any problems, queen c7 as well, and black is considered to have a small edge in this position. So the move bishop f5 doesn't really leave any considerable weaknesses in the position. Therefore, after the move bishop f5, you could say that black is already winning the opening battle from a classical perspective. He's going to have a better piece, white is going to have a worse piece on c1, but according to the engines and according to grandmaster practice, it's by no means better for black. It's slightly better for white, as most mainline openings. White continues with knight to c3. e6, closing down the pawn triangle. If you play A, you need to follow it up with B. And now the justification for white's play is that if you're familiar with the fact that the bishop pair is worth more than any other combination of the minor pieces, then black is going to suffer because of his bishop on f5. The bishop doesn't have that many squares. It can be captured and rounded up. Now, before I show you the pattern with which white harasses the black bishop, one thing should be noted. This is the so-called Semi Slav or Caro-Kann or Scandinavian defense pawn structure, in which the pawn triangle is on c6, e6 and d5, light squares. Therefore, black's good bishop is the f8 bishop. Usually this bishop is the bad bishop, because in the Semi-Slav it's still stuck on c8, and even if you get it outside of the pawn chain, like in the advanced Caro-Kann or in this variation of the Slav, you're not going to try that hard to hold on to it, because, as I said, your pawns on light squares reduce its scope, and you don't mind giving up that bishop, especially if white is going to be wasting some time to do that. So white does that with the move knight h4, of course. In this position, black has two options. He can play the move bishop g6, which is the main move, after which white just takes, which we are going to look at in a second. The other move is bishop e4. After bishop e4, white continues with the move f3, and black now plays bishop g6. Now, the same variation, if white tries to follow the main line, knight takes g6, h takes g6, the position isn't really the same, because, as you can see, white has created quite big weaknesses around his king, and any movement of this knight could bring an annoying check on h4, for example. So when you move the pawns around your king, you make your king weaker. Furthermore, the move f3 has just restricted the h4 knight. So in any event in which the g6 bishop can safely move, this knight is basically unpre at the moment. So imagine that the bishop was on g8 and it's black to move. Black would play the move g5 and trap the bishop. Okay, white now continues with queen b3. Black defends the weakness, queen c7, bishop d2. Usually in the Quiet Slav, the bishop is developed to d2, as opposed before playing e4, and if you're not going for b3, bishop b2, because you want to stop this pin, and in some variations bishop b4 is going to be an annoying pin. Bishop e7, g3. This is not so much to fianchetto your bishop, but to give your knight an escape square, because as you can see, this bishop is now poised to capture the knight. Bishop h5, attacking the f3 pawn. So now, in the event of the f knight moving to d7, the f3 pawn would virtually be hanging. So let's say it's black to play again, knight f to d7, bishop takes h4, and bishop takes f3. White now castles queenside, knight f to d7, and now bishop e2, defending the f3 pawn so that black cannot just capture an h4, knight b6, and the variation continues from here. It would be unwise for black to give up his dark squared bishop, his good bishop. White has created kingside pawn weaknesses, but as you can see, black is most probably going to be castling kingside. He is firstly far away from castling queenside. Secondly, the move c5 could be extremely annoying. So moving the pawns around the king side for white may not turn out to be such a bad idea. In this position, there have still been 4 games in Grandmaster play. All 4 have ended in a draw. Okay, and that's the sideline with bishop to e4. By far the more common option is bishop g6, just allowing white to capture the bishop. And now bishop d2, once again stopping this annoying pin with bishop b4. Knight bd7. Well, there's another option. If you don't want to go bishop to d2, and if you try to simply develop your bishop to one of the more active squares, either b2 or playing e4, you could go for g3, knight bd7, bishop g2, dc4, queen e2, knight b6. It should be noted that b5 doesn't work because bishop takes c6. Knight b6 defending the pawn, and the position is once again considered equal. White has a pretty good bishop here. This pawn isn't that safe. a4, a5 can come and the knight can be dislodged, but bishop d2 is more common. Knight bd7, g3 again, bishop e7, b3, e5. Black is trying to open the position up as well, and now we are going to get a bunch of central trades which are going to lead to a perfectly even position, which is on Grandmaster level what you usually get with the Quiet Slav, because the Quiet Slav got its name for a reason. It's not aggressive. cd5, ed4, ed4, knight d5, knight d5, cd5, bishop g2, knight f6. As you can see, both sides have an isolated queen's pawn. The pawns are blockaded, so there aren't that many attacking ideas with them, and as in normal IQP positions, black is going to castle and nothing much is going on in this position. You could say that white's bishop is slightly more active because it's already targeting the d5 weakness, but on the other hand, white doesn't have a knight on f3 to defend his weakness, so black could be fast to target his as well. So nothing major going on here. The black knight is good because it can come into e4. The white has the bishop pair, but as I said, should be perfectly equal. So that's the move bishop f5. What you want to do with white when black plays this move, trying to get everything he can out of the position, you want to take the bishop pair. Otherwise, black is just going to be slightly better if you allow him to play. So let's say e6 and knight c3, e6, and you play something like bishop e2, and black plays the move h6. And now all of a sudden, black has a good bishop and he's able to save it. So here I would say strategically black is slightly better. He simply has a better minor piece, and you're still far away from playing e4. Okay. The other four moves we are going to be looking at briefly. So here, the second most popular move is e6, which, okay, you don't allow this whole maneuver of bishop f5 and knight h4, which is the trickiest and the best for black. You simply close down the pawn chain and go for a semi-Slav. Now, as I said, if knight c3 is played, then you are playing the main line Meran. If bishop d3 is played, then you may still transpose, so after knight b to d7, which is the best move for black. If white now plays knight c3, black is simply going to take on c4, bishop takes c4 and b5, going for the main line Meran once again. Therefore, the Quiet Slav is a way to play the semi-Slav without allowing the main lines. So white simply castles here. dc4 is still the main move, but black now needs to do something about his bishop, and the main move is in fact bishop d6. dc4 can be played, but after bishop takes c4, black doesn't go for b5, that would be too slow. He plays bishop d6, knight c3, castles, e4, and now e5, stopping the central expansion, and in the fashion of the semi-Slav defense, trying to open up the c8 bishop. So as you can see, experience in the semi-Slav would be way more helpful in the Quiet Slav, especially in these e6 variations, because this is a pure semi-Slav position with a slightly different move order, and it seems like one of the two players have messed up the move order in the Meran, but it's in fact the main line Quiet, or one of the main lines in the Quiet. Bishop g5, queen e7. All the support in this position is going to the e5 point, e5 pawn, d5. Knight b6 attacking the bishop has to move h6, bishop h4, rook d8, rook to e1. White is preparing to recapture on d5 with the pawn, put pressure on the e5 pawn, and the b6 knight is eventually going to have to go to d7. Bishop g4, once again playing around the e5 square, h3, bishop h5, and now g4. And white is forced to make such a positional concession because the e5 square is extremely important, and the bishop on h5 was still pinning the f3 knight to the queen. So now bishop g6, queen e2, once again playing for e5, so that after cd5, ed5, knight bd7, bishop c2, all the control is on the e5 square, and both sides are basically playing around that. Now you can notice that white has an isolated queen's pawn, and it's already advanced to the d5 square, so structurally that means that it's harder to utilize the pawn for an attack, and that it's more of a weakness, because usually if white pushes the pawn past the fourth rank without dissolving it, then it becomes weaker. So you could imagine something like knight b6 coming into the position and moving the bishop. Something like knight b6, bishop b4, which removes the c3 knight from the defense and opens up the d8 rook, could mean that the pawn is vulnerable. So I'm not a big fan of this variation for white. So if you know how to play it with black, if you know how to play this e6 waiting move, and if you have experience in the semi-Slav, this could be the variation for you, because if white doesn't play actively, this whole central tension thing could backfire. Now, if white doesn't go for these variations with d5, then he is simply acknowledging that he is not going for the best variation possible. He could play something like rook e1. We would have something like rook d8, and now once again d5 is the best move, but white could do something like bishop b3 in anticipation for that. Now e takes d4, knight takes d4, and you're playing sort of a mainline king's pawn opening now with the knight on c3, knight on d4, bishop on b3, something that could come out of the Sicilian or the Philidor for white, I'm saying. So this is easier to play. You don't have an isolated pawn on d5, but black is considered to be equal. Okay, the third move I want to look at is the so-called pin defense or pin variation with bishop g4. As the name says, you are still developing your bishop, but you're not placing it on f5. Now, you may wonder, well, isn't bishop g4 much better than bishop f5? Because now after e6, white doesn't have the move knight h4, winning the bishop. Well, in this position after bishop g4, and this is very important to remember, because most of the finesse in the Quiet Slav is going to revolve around black developing or not developing his light-squared bishop. So here it's very important that you play the move h3 immediately. Why? Because this either forces the bishop to take on f3, which is in fact the main line. So bishop f3, queen f3, and now you get the Moscow variation of the semi-Slav in reverse after e6. If you know the position with black, you can watch the video on the Moscow. So now white is going to be putting his queen back to d1. In many positions, fianchettoing his light-squared bishop on g2 or placing it on e2. And yeah, if this is the main line and black has given up his bishop pair, once again you see that we have reached this point at which black has had to make a concession. So knight c3, knight b d7, bishop d3, bishop b4, castles, queen d1, queen e7, queen to b3, attacking the bishop, dc4, bishop c4, knight b6, attacking the bishop, bishop e2, and bishop d6. And again, white has the bishop pair, but his c1 bishop is horrible compared to the d6 bishop. The d6 bishop is black's best piece. Furthermore, black has the option to utilize the d5 square if it doesn't allow an easy e4. White is going to have a plan of pushing the e4 pawn and going for, well, trying to break through with d5 through this semi-Slav structure. Eventually, that's going to be a late middle game plan, but for now, e4 will serve the purpose of opening up the bishop, because as you can see, moving the queen again and playing b3 and bishop a3 or bishop a2 is going to take a long time. After h3, if black doesn't take the bishop, obviously the other option is bishop h5, trying to save the bishop. And now why is that inferior? In this position after h3, there have been 800 games with bishop takes and 600 games with bishop h5, so most grandmasters choose to take. After bishop h5, knight c3, e6, g4. This bishop is considered to be a bad piece, because once it goes to g6, it's still going to be captured after knight e5. And again, black is losing the bishop pair. So what we can conclude is that if after e3 the Quiet Slav, you play the move bishop g4 and white knows what he is doing, you are giving up the bishop pair. So in the Quiet Slav, even though white has seemingly made a stupid move, keeping his bishop on c1, he has made sure that black A has to do the same thing and leave his bishop on c8, or B tries to develop the bishop and loses the bishop pair. So white is playing for long-term advantages, and in this position after knight b d7 takes, white has the bishop pair. In both variations, both in bishop f5 and bishop g4, white has had to make structural concessions. So in this case, h3, bishop g4. In bishop f5, he had to play f3, but he has the bishop pair, which is an advantage. Okay, now let's look at two moves with which black tries to do nothing with the bishop, going for the sort of Chameleon Slav. If now knight c3 is played, we have the Chameleon Slav. We are not going to be looking at that. And if a6 bishop d3, which is the main move. We now have bishop g4, again opening up the bishop. In this case, white doesn't go for the move h3. It's not as necessary. It's much more important to develop his pieces because his bishop has already been developed on d3. He can go for that later on if he wishes to. And in many positions, the knight will want to come to the g5 square and not to the e5 square, as we are going to see. Knight b to d2, e6, castles, knight b d7, b3, preparing to develop the bishop to b2. Bishop d6, most active square, bishop b2, castles, queen c2 supporting the bishop, and looking at the h7 square. And now after queen b8, firstly white has to do something about the h2 pawn. And he also gets a tempo on the bishop, so after h3 defending his h2 pawn, because in some positions black was threatening to take, and if the other knight is not here to capture the h2 pawn. So now bishop h5, and now knight g5. And in this position with a6, which is considered, of course, to be slower than bishop f5 or bishop g4, white is playing for this activity on the h7 pawn, and after bishop g6, he trades off the bishop with his own d3 bishop, and after g6, he manages to play the move e4. So that's the idea. You're not going for the bishop pair, you are going for the quick e4, opening up the center and claiming a space advantage and a strategic advantage in the center, because as you can see now, white has this huge pawn center and it's going to be hard for black to play around it. The main move, in fact, is bishop f4 for black, and knight d to f3, trying to support his advanced knight some more. After d takes e4, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, queen takes e4, knight f6 can be played to gain a tempo. And of course, as you can see, this central structure is supposed to be giving white an edge. So against a6, white wants to play for the quick e4 as soon as possible, and he doesn't go for the bishop pair if black develops the bishop to g4. Remember with black that if you play a6, you are going to be playing in conjunction with bishop g4, not bishop f5. And remember that if knight c3 is played, you go for b5, which is sort of the main idea in the Chameleon defense. You want to expand and open up your bishop as soon as possible, gain space on the queen side. Okay, the last move I want to look at is something similar to the Schlechter Slav. Again, if knight c3 and g6, so let me just show you a slightly different move order. This is a video we are going to be looking at next. So d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, g6. The Schlechter variation of the Slav, we get that same position in which the second most popular move is e3. So now if e3 comes later, after knight c3, we are transposing to the Schlechter. So this we are going to be covering in the next video, because the positions simply transpose. After g6, by far the main move is knight c3, and we are now in the Schlechter Slav. So to not spoil the next video, I'm not going to talk about this too much. And you know that if you play the Quiet Slav and black plays g6, you are going to be, well, leaving the Quiet Slav pretty soon. So 5 options for black to play against this, which gives black quite a big arsenal to add to his repertoire. I would say that the best way to meet the Quiet Slav is to play bishop f5, which is the most principled move. You don't really mind giving up that bishop pair if white is going to incur structural advantages. I prefer the move bishop e4 to bishop h5 after knight h4. And bishop f5 leads to interesting positions in which white is going to have to make a concession to get rid of your bad bishop. So that's a good trade in my opinion. Okay, let me know what you think about the video. I still have the modern Slav and the Schlechter Slav to go through. After that, we are continuing either with the Benoni or with the Queen's Gambit declined, depending on how the tie break in the vote goes, because they were tied in the last vote. Okay, let me know what you think. Any comments are appreciated. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.